Okay, this is IB History Study Session 1, Part 2, where we will be continuing to look at the War for American Independence. We've already covered causes, and now we're going to cover the contribution of leaders to the process of independence, with primary emphasis on Washington, Adams, and Jefferson. Time permits, we'll look at Mexico and Iturbide. The question came up, what types of questions might arise over leaders? If we look back at the questions from previous years, from 2013, we see compare and contrast contribution of two of the following leaders to the process of independence: Adams, Jefferson, San Martin, Bolivar. So you could do Adams and Jefferson. If we look a few years earlier, 09, I see compare contrast role of leadership in two independence movements of the region. So you would certainly need in that one, you would have to have two different regions. Leadership is one that occurs with moderate regularity, and it's been a few years. So there's a good chance we might see a contribution of leaders question. If we're looking at Washington, Adams, and Jefferson, we can start with George Washington. His primary contribution is that of a general. Remember, one of the main things to keep in mind when talking about the War for Independence is to keep it separate and straight in your mind as distinct from their presidencies, which it would be really tempting to do. So when you think about Washington, think about his military contribution strictly. He was a Virginia delegate to the Second Continental Congress, but was quickly selected to run the Massachusetts militia and have it adopted as a continental army. His significance could not be understated. He's primarily a military leader. His actual record of battles, his win-loss record, would not look too good. He lost many battles or fought to a draw, retreated far more than he attacked. He won a handful of battles, most notably we talked about the surrender at Yorktown, also the victory at Trenton. The classic, we'll attack you on Christmas Day at dawn when the German mercenaries are hung over. And we won that battle. So Washington had a great victory then, but other than those and a handful of others, many other very difficult battles. So it's not that he's a brilliant tactician or Napoleon or worked magic, but he had a charisma, he submitted to sacrifice, and he never gave up. The doggedness, the determination, the duty, and the fact that this army, he never let while he didn't, march to victory with success after success, he avoided catastrophe. He was really good at avoiding catastrophe, such as the British blundered into two separate times. Either one of those would have potentially ended Washington's career and his army had they blundered the way the British did at both Saratoga and Yorktown. Washington could not afford a single mistake of that magnitude, and he did not make one. He almost did it in New York very early on, and he did not repeat it. Thankfully for him, the British could not capitalize on it, or simply did not. Furthermore, the real significance in the end game with Washington is the fact that he respects the Congress. You cannot understate this, how much Washington defers to Congress when so many people in the country look to him, look up to him, would follow him wherever he would go, whatever power he might claim, and he did not grasp for that and refused it the times it was hinted at or implied he should grasp at it, and continuously emphasized civilian government, democratic process, and the Congress, despite its many promises and despite its total inability to keep his men supplied or paid, and would come close to lying about supplying them, never broke faith with them. So in several ways, those are the true success of Washington, his contribution. The contribution next most significant is actually probably Jefferson, because as an intellectual leader. He was not the most outspoken, but his contribution to the actual text of the Declaration of Independence, of his usage of John Locke, citing the rationale for independence, the justification, the fact that he was from Virginia and brought the most populous and wealthy at the time colony along with him was a strength. And the other leader they could ask about is Adams. Now on the curriculum it refers to just Adams, and on a previous exam they stated that since it's left ambiguous, it is, repeat, it is acceptable to write about either Sam or John Adams. So if it says use Adams as an example, feel free to know that unless it specifies that either John or Sam is acceptable. You know, Sam Adams was that true instigator, particularly on that crisis moment of the Tea Party, since I've emphasized that as a critical aspect leading to the movement for independence. The fact that he instigated the problems in Boston and was a mover and shaker there and stirred the pot in Boston, actively led the Tea Party and the resistance to coercive acts. He was also a delegate to the Continental Congress and advocate of independence, but that would be Sam Adams' contribution. John Adams was a bit more moderate than Sam, but when compared to the other delegates, was quite the radical, an early adopter of independency as a solution, and was very vocal and outspoken to the point of annoyance of many of the other delegates, but stridently called for, debated for, argued for independence as the proper course of action, and through his much more vocal, outspoken efforts, did convince and persuade some of the other delegates. Secondly, Adams went on, I guess Jefferson did this as well, so I can lump Adams and Jefferson together in that they both went abroad. Jefferson only much later. I'll take that back. Adams, during the war, went abroad, first to France, where he was less successful, but then eventually to Holland, and in the Netherlands was marginally successful at recruiting loans and liquid financing for the government and the Continental Army from the Dutch. And so that's a brief overview of the three primary leaders they could ask about on the IB exam with regard to American independence. A quick summary way to think of it is that Washington primarily contributed with the sword, with his military contribution. Jefferson with his pen, eventually he wrote the Virginia Constitution, but particularly the Declaration of Independence. And Adams primarily with his voice as an outspoken voice for independence.